Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Automated HIPAA Compliance Powered by Cloudticity on AWS. My name is Jamie Bright, and I work on the marketing team here at Chef. And I'm pleased to introduce today's speakers, Jerry Miller with Cloudticity, Joe Fontes with AWS, and Christoph Hartmann with Chef. Before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping items to cover quickly. A recording of this webinar will be available on demand after the live session, accessible through the same link you're using now. We'd also love to hear from you during today's presentation. Jerry, Joe, and Christoph will be answering questions at the end of the session, so please feel free to send those along at any time using the Ask a Question tab on the top of your screen. Also on the top of your screen is an Attachments tab. There you'll find links to additional resources for this topic. For those of you just joining, welcome to today's presentation, Automated HIPAA Compliance Powered by Cloudticity on AWS. We're with Jerry Miller, Joe Fontes, and Chris Hartmann. Let's go ahead and get started. Jerry, why don't you fill everyone in on what we'll be covering here today?
Sounds great. Thanks, Jamie. My name is Jerry Miller. I'm the founder and chief technologist of Cloudticity. We focus exclusively on building healthcare applications on AWS. We're an AWS advanced partner, one of only 10 in the world that have their healthcare competency, and we're also an audited managed service provider. Today, we're going to be talking about our cloud compliance as a service. It's powered by Chef, runs on AWS. I'm going to give a brief overview of that service. I'm going to turn it over to Christoph, who is going to talk about Chef's compliance features. Joe is going to give a rundown on the requirements for HIPAA applications on AWS. We'll do a brief demo to show how the product and service works, and then we'll wrap it up and take questions at that time. So the first thing we want to talk about is really the end state. Why is compliance as a service important, and why is compliance in general important? Now, as you know, HIPAA compliance is a very large topic, some of which can be covered by technology, and other pieces of it need to be covered through policies, procedures, training, that sort of thing. We'll focus today exclusively on the technology portion of that. So what is it that we want to get out of a compliance service? So the first thing is it needs to be predictable. We need to know that every time we deploy an update to our application, every time we make changes to the infrastructure, that we can predictably know that our end state is a secure and compliant solution. We also need to know that it's repeatable. We need to know that every time we throw the dart, it's going to land in the same place. We need to make sure that we can trust the tools and the technology to allow us to have the strong faith that our underlying systems are fully compliant. That being said, we still need to maintain some degree of agility. One of the challenges with heavily regulated industries is there tends to be a lot of bureaucracy, which really slows down velocity in the ability to quickly iterate and provide continuous updates to value to the end customer. So we need to be able to make sure that we provide predictability and repeatability, but not at the expense of agility. Finally, we also need auditability and accountability. We need to make sure that we can trust the underlying systems, that they work the same way each time, and that we can do forensic analysis if necessary. The end state is all of this is supposed to lead to a fully compliant system. Now, what are some of the things that we focus on when we look at compliance? The first thing is automation. We need to make sure that everything we're doing is fully automated. What we know is that every time a human's fingers touch the keyboard, there's a likelihood that something is going to go wrong. So our primary watchword is always to automate absolutely every piece of the process from end to end. We also need to make sure that we have full visibility into what's going on through monitoring. So we need to be able to see exactly what's going on inside our systems to understand when things may be moving off track so that we can fix them. The way that we do that is through extensive focus on logging. And we need to make sure not only that our logs are updated, but that they're searchable, and also that we can store them effectively for forensic analysis should anything like a breach occur. And the final piece is we need to make sure that we can act on anything that comes up. So the output of all of these services will be automated actions and notifications to humans when necessary. So that's the overview of why we're doing what we're doing. What we've done is we've taken Chef's compliance service, which is a very strong tool to do CIS analysis on your environment. and we've mapped that to HIPAA controls. So now we have a fully automated suite of tests that we can apply into an AWS environment that will identify any potential violations of HIPAA. So some examples of the mappings that we've done, and we've done this across the board. And during the demo, you'll see a little bit more detail what that looks like. So there's an overview of the compliance as a service. I'd like to turn it over to Christoph now to talk a little bit about the Chef product and how the underlying implementation works.
Thanks, Jerry. So you may know Chef as a strong leader as part of infrastructure as code. As Chef, we have a strong history also in testing of infrastructure. We have been long provided Test Kitchen as part of our tooling that enables companies to ensure that whatever is deployed in production is also secure and compliant. But it was more focused on infrastructure testing beforehand, where we just ensured that Chef cookbooks are properly doing what they're intended for. But when we talk about that now, we see especially two things. We see compliance as code. And compliance as code is like infrastructure as code, but as focused on security and compliance. So that boils down to two specific things. So the first thing is we need to have a language to describe compliance as code. That is really challenging, and I will show you in a second how that is working. And once we have that language, the question is, where can I apply that language to? Traditionally, we have a lot of security tools that work on production servers, but it was still very hard to do it early on in a development cycle. So that's something that we observed a lot in companies. So we saw a challenge where DevOps teams now work great together, but compliance and security teams are a little bit alone. They have not been well integrated into the development cycle. And let me tell you a little bit from my background. I worked for a while at a big telco over in Germany, and we set up an OpenStack environment. And that OpenStack environment was built up with Chef cookbooks. So everything was automated. But once we tried to bring it to production, of course, we had to meet the security and compliance guidelines. But those guidelines, they are written in PDF documents. So that meant that it was really hard as a development team to follow those guidelines quickly. So a project was at risk in our case. So we had to manage additional work for that security. And it was really hard to work together. And that is not difficult because the team or the person working on different teams haven't been easy to work with, but they use different artifacts. So as a developer or DevOps person, you're used to code. As a security person, you're used to pen testing, you're used to bash scripts, and as compliance person, you may write documents, you know all this detail about what should be done, but it's not in an automated way. So the challenge here is really how we can help those departments working together more effectively. So when we talk about compliance, it's not only about the tooling, but it is also about how we collaborate together. And that's what DevOps is about. And we bring this now over to security and compliance as well. So we believe that Chef as a platform is a solution to that question. And for that reason, we announced last November a tool called InSpec. So what is InSpec? InSpec is our testing and compliance engine. So that's like Chef, but it's focusing on infrastructure testing, as I said. So that's the core engine behind Chef compliance. That's the engine that we use to run all CIS profiles. It's open sourced. It's based on, it's licensed as Apache, as we do with Chef, because we as Chef believe that the open source community is a tremendous help for us to work together. We like to share how we do it. We like to collaborate. We like to build a community about that product, and also about the tooling that is helping so many companies to achieve their goals. Because we know it's really challenging and hard to implement compliance. So I like to get a short introduction about how InSpec is working, but I'm proposing you to take a look on InSpec on GitHub, and you will find more documentation about that. So that small example is showing you, for example, that if you want to check the SSH configuration, normally you had to parse the file and to figure out what's going on in that configuration, but InSpec is doing that abstraction already. So InSpec is offering a resource, in this case, SSHD config, and it's offering a protocol, and it should be version 2. If it's not version 2, something is completely broken, and the result will be failed. So you can easily execute that now by calling inspec exec and the test RB, and then it's running on the local machine. It's executing it, and you will see the result. So that framework gives you now the power to run a test everywhere. So if we talk about compliance, of course, we need some more information within the test. So when we talk about compliance, we normally use the term control. A control has a lot more metadata attached to a test. So in this case, criticality, a title and description, and that helps organizations to share those tests across departments. Even if you're not a developer, you can easily understand what's going on here. You can read the title, you can read the description, so you can read the test without knowing how it's executed. So that's helping the sharing of the knowledge. But again, instead of writing it in a PDF document, you now have an executable piece of code that can be run everywhere. So when I talk run everywhere, I'm not saying just only local. You can also run it remotely. So you can run it via SSH, you can run it on Windows via WinRM, you can even run it on a Docker container. So there's no restriction. So this framework is offering a lot of power. It's really flexible, extensible, and we use the same framework for providing CIS profiles, because we know that a lot of companies are following HIPAA guidelines, PCI guidelines, and CIS is the basis for those. So Chef Compliance ships with a bunch of profiles. I'd like to mention that also IBM has contributed our AX support, HP has contributed the HPUX support. So a lot of big vendors are investing in InSpec. So now we got the idea about InSpec. InSpec is a language, it's a toolkit that allows you to define infrastructure test and compliance. And the challenge is, how can I apply it to my infrastructure? So as I said in the very beginning, when we talk about infrastructure as code, Chef made it possible to harmonize how I set up my development environment, my staging environment, and my production environment. So that made it a lot easier to maintain the complexity of so many systems. Still, if we take a look on compliance and security, we have a lot of tooling available on the market that is targeting the production servers, but it's not so easy to bring it to staging environments and even to development environment. And this is critical from our perspective, because we think that speed and velocity for shipping applications, for shipping our tooling to production servers is essential. And that requires a tooling around so that we can ship software with safety. So whenever we ship something fast, we need to ensure that also secure. Think of it like a car. If you have a normal car, you upgrade the engine, you better also upgrade the brakes, because otherwise you will not make the next curve. So InSpec is the tooling that brings the same idea that Chef has done for infrastructure as code to compliance as code. So now we have the same language. We can run it in our development environment, staging environment, and also production environment. And you see what's now possible by having the pre-built profiles shipped with Chef Compliance. You can now have the same security requirements tested in your staging environment. So that means whenever you ship a new release of your software, for example, you can verify already, is it complying with my security and compliance guidelines? If not, you can address it early on before you put your software into production. And that ensures that you have a high uptime and less outages. And we believe that this is essential in a world where we have more software as a services offered, and also companies depending on those. So you better ensure that everything works smooth for you and for your customers. So how is it working? So as I showed you before, Chef, when you deploy an infrastructure as code, you're not writing it directly on your local machine or push it on the server. Instead, you write a cookbook, a recipe. This is shared in various environments, and you can redo it everywhere. And now, since we have everything as code, we can easily bring all departments together. Security, DevOps teams, and compliance teams can work together to ship a production environment together in a fast, secure way. And that's the idea for building compliance. So now with the tooling available, we can scan a production server, we can fix all those things we find locally, we can test it in our staging environments, we can remediate beforehand in production, and then we can also verify it again. So that's a continuous loop. Of course, compliance is evolving as well. You get new requirements, but again, you're not just deploying it into production, you also run it before in your staging environment. So that is available in our test kitchen. We offer test kitchen with Kitchen InSpec. It's an extension where we can run InSpec tests easily in test kitchen. So whatever profile we have in Chef Compliance, again, we can run in test kitchen easily. You see all failures on your local machine. We have Chef Compliance as part of Chef Automate. It's running all those compliance across your infrastructure, as Gary showed you beforehand, and we will see a demo about that later on. We don't believe it's only the part, but we also integrate the whole compliance part as part of our Chef Automate workflow component, so that we have a visualization of a profile integrated into the CI/CD pipeline. So you can apply it, you can make dependent profiles whenever you ship a cookbook, and that allows you, whenever you change, for example, the compliance guidelines, you automatically can rebuild or restart a job to verify that your cookbook is still complying to those rules. So that adds a lot of safety to your production environment. And finally, we also have the visibility component where we not only show Chef Converge and make it easily accessible across your infrastructure, but also a compliance view component where you can see the running compliance scan on all those nodes. So that gives you a high degree of safety across your infrastructure. So I'd like to hand over to Joseph.
Yes, thank you. My name is Joseph Fontes. I am a solutions architect with Amazon Web Services, and what I do is facilitate technical adoption of the platform with customers and partners. In starting off, we always like to work backwards from the customer, so we use a lot of customer quotes here. The Cleveland Clinic is one of the most recognized brands in the healthcare space and one of the most respected hospital groups in the world. And so, you know, as an example here, they have a case study available publicly. With all the quotes that we'll show today, there are case studies available. But in this example here, they built web applications on top of AWS in order to allow them to leverage the flexibility, agility of the AWS platform in order to lower costs and improve patient care. They've worked with the AWS third-party ecosystem, and this is one of the examples that kind of highlights the narrative of, you know, modifying how it is that we utilize resources in healthcare. focusing on patient outcomes, focusing on, the experience of physicians and healthcare staff. Here we, when we look at scalability, flexibility, agility, we look at things like the self-service nature of the platform, being able to choose what services you utilize and how you utilize them, having no upfront costs, being able to utilize the services that you want without having to, invest in long-term contracts, and then having the ability to utilize the services that you need and the amount that you need them, things like scaling up when you need it and scaling down in order to preserve costs. So, as I mentioned, AWS really is, we work from the customer up. And so what that means is a lot of our services and features are really driven by customer requests. When you look at the history of new services and features, in 2013, we had 280 new services and features. In 2014, that number jumped to 516. In 2015, it was 722, and as of August 1st of this year, we are at 524 new services and features. We're also, one of the oldest and most experienced in this industry. And to quote Andy Jassy, there's no compression algorithm for experience. And you'll notice that we're gonna go through a lot of customer examples, a lot of partner examples, and you're gonna see a lot of names that you recognize. ClearData, Orion Healthcare, Philips, and they all choose AWS because of this base concept of scalability, flexibility, and agility. Orion Healthcare, one of the largest HIE vendors on the market. A great example, they deployed the Cal Index with the help of LogicWorks as a partner on AWS, which is a California statewide health information exchange. The Cal Index covers 9 million patient records, making it the largest HIE in the U.S. This is also a public case study available on the AWS public website with a video describing the case study available on YouTube. So these are the areas that we're going to kind of focus on today: performance, emerging technologies, the partner ecosystem, and then we're going to cover security and compliance a bit more in depth. So kind of starting off with the triple aim of healthcare, this idea was created by the Institute for Health Improvement. And it goes, it seems like a logical evolution. It's focusing on patient experience, the health of populations, and the reducing the cost of the system and be able to utilize resources, in those other areas. Here's an example from MedStar, which is a hospital network in Virginia. They were able to deploy their Find a Doc website on top of AWS. And, the big takeaway here is they realized a decrease in downtime from 120 minutes per month to less than 5 minutes per month, with a decrease in operational costs of 40% versus their on-prem solution. Once again, details are available online. This is a public AWS case study. And here's an example deployment. Once again, this is a very self-service model, so you can kind of utilize the services that you want, the features that you want, and kind of put it all together in the way that best fits your organization. We offer analytics solutions, everything from data ingestion, scalable analytics, machine learning, through, storage, archiving, processing. It's that full ecosystem of solutions And kind of one of the fun examples is that using AWS, you could actually ingest and store a day's worth of tweets, which is roughly 500 million tweets, for less than $75 a day. And it just kind of shows, when you architect for an AWS solution, you can really bring costs down by and still be able to meet the current and future needs of the organization. Here are a couple of examples. Change Healthcare, which is formerly Endion, which is in revenue cycle management. That shows, this is a really good example of scalability. Intermountain Systems, this is another great example as well, in that quick turnaround and that agility. What we really want to focus on is being able to modify how it is that you utilize technology resources in healthcare, as opposed to having systems administrators and network engineers work on, that infrastructure engineering and that data center management. You can have them focus on things that you really want them to look at, like having your network engineers figure out, Wi-Fi coverage, and having your systems administrators work on, application templates within your EHR, rather than, trying to track down networking issues within a data center. And one of the really powerful tools of AWS is in using this third-party ecosystem. Over 5,000 consultants, over 3,000 software vendors, 22 global premier partners, and here are some examples here. Practice Fusion, which is cloud-based EHR. Infor, Philips is a great example. Obviously, Cloudticity, vendors such as Chef really leverage the AWS platform to be able to provide the best solutions for all customers. And this isn't just healthcare focused. When you look at the AWS platform, it's the best of every industry. We take security and compliance standards from finance, government, education, healthcare, and we combine them into one platform. When you deploy HIPAA services onto AWS, you're also deploying onto an infrastructure that's been verified as compliant with all of these other industries as well. There's no separate infrastructure for finance or education. It's all the same, so you get the best of breed from all of these different industries. So there's a common term that we use with security on AWS, and that is the shared responsibility model. And it comes down to two things. It's what the customer is responsible for, and that would be the customer and the partner, versus that which AWS provides. It's kind of this idea of security of the cloud versus security within the cloud. And I think this quote from the director of HIMSS really brings it all together. It's most healthcare institutions don't have time or resources to devote to cybersecurity that an established cloud vendor might have. And I think it's a really good example. If you look at AWS and that which we are responsible for, which is this idea of security of the cloud. I, as an employee, I can't just go over to Oregon, find the AWS data center lit up in neon lights and go in and just walk around and see what it is. We actually don't even know where it is. Because I have logical access to the environment, I don't have physical access into the data centers. And so, who's allowed to actually walk into these data centers is strictly controlled. We have things like attestations available for the different compliance standards, and that shows, the level of physical security that we're responsible for. And then you look on the other side, which is the customer responsibility. And that's the term, security in the cloud. That is, how does the customer, secure their applications and their platforms, things like, is your administrative password secure? Are your sites password protected as they should be? Are you using, two-factor authentication? And when you look at more of the advanced concepts, things like, are you using security groups in order to protect your infrastructure that is running on AWS? When we have the security and compliance standards available online at aws.amazon.com/compliance and aws.amazon.com/security. And as I mentioned, this is a couple of examples of the compliance standards that we hit. We have everything from, multiple ISO standards, SOC 123, DoD standards, everything to MPAA, which is Motion Picture Association of America. And all of these best practices are not just for the healthcare space. The healthcare is one component. As I mentioned, you get the best practices from multiple industries, and that is the responsibility of AWS. And then looking back at this, security in the cloud, it's taking advantage of third-party solutions, of looking at the ecosystem providers, of working with partners like, Cloudticity and Chef, as well as leveraging AWS services like CloudTrail and CloudWatch, Trusted Advisor, and, following basic systems administration and programming experience in securing your workloads within the cloud. There is no HIPAA certification for infrastructure. We provide the base that allows customers and partners to deploy HIPAA compliant workloads. We're going to see some of those services available where you can run PHI. And this gives you an overview of the services that are HIPAA eligible. Within a HIPAA account on AWS, you can utilize all the services within a HIPAA account on AWS, but patient health information should only be processed or stored or transmitted through these services. And so we have the examples of compute, storage, database, etc. here. We also have a BAA available with addendum. Information about that is also available on the AWS Healthcare and AWS Compliance websites. And here we have ELISA, which is a healthcare data analytics firm. Their specialty is considered health engagement management. Their feedback has always been that running on AWS has allowed them to dramatically improve the experience that they've had for their customers and for internally within their organization. They've been able to scale up as needed. They've been able to scale down as needed. They've been able to reduce costs. And, there's always multiple steps when you deploy onto a provider like AWS, when you deploy into, an environment where it's infrastructure as a service. There's a different methodology to doing things on-prem versus within, an infrastructure as a services environment. And the more you leverage the AWS style of approach, the more you'll see the cost savings, the more you'll see the real benefits to using the platform. That's part of leveraging the third-party ecosystem. That's part of leveraging partners. It's also part of taking part in training, reading documentation, and being able to leverage those scaling capabilities and using the right storage, the right services to meet your needs. So we always, get the question of where is it do I start? When we engage with AWS, and the example I always go with is, leverage your ecosystem, talk to the partners, participate in education. We've got tons of public resources available. We've got tons of documentation available. A great start is the AWS healthcare website. But also identify those workloads that are easiest to migrate, those that get kind of the biggest bang for the buck. It is a little bit of a learning experience with, taking on new infrastructure like this. So these are just some really good examples where you get some really fun results rather quickly. Things like analytics is a great example. When you run workloads on EMR and you're able to calculate reports that would have taken, days to compute, but now you can run them in, a couple of hours by just scaling up to thousands of instances, or utilizing, DR with storage and archiving, transferring things over to S3 and then over to Glacier, and realizing these cost savings, massive cost savings, by storing backups and documents either in nearline storage or offline storage, and being able to take advantage of, the AWS ecosystem. And I think now we have the demo.
It's great. Perfect. Thanks, Joe. Interesting. So Christoph touched on the importance of turning things like compliance into code, and how that can really be a part of the CI/CD pipeline and generate tremendous scale and efficiency and agility without compromising security. Joe did a great job of sort of describing how AWS can bring tremendous flexibility and agility, and in fact, with proven case studies, do so in a HIPAA compliant manner. I'm going to take you through the compliance as a service product very briefly and just kind of show what it looks like in action. So here's the Chef compliance product. What we want to do is let's run an initial scan of an environment that should be fairly compliant. So we've got a couple of hosts out there. We're going to look at a few different compliance levels. I'm not going to check all of these because that takes forever to run, but we will make sure that we're including the HIPAA compliance checks, and we'll just do a quick scan. So this is going out. It's working with agents on those instances. It's running a number of tests. And it's bringing back a report on general compliance. And so other than a couple of Apache issues, minor issues, it looks like we're in pretty good compliance on these instances. Now let's go make some changes. What if we were to go and attach some unencrypted storage to one of those instances? That wouldn't necessarily be a good thing. So while that's attaching, let's then go and change out to an insecure Apache profile. Just make sure that that's attached. Give that just a second to finish up. We'll note that it's not an encrypted volume, which should trigger a warning for us. See if that volume has attached itself. Let's go back and rerun our scan. And notice that we've now got some major issues. We've got things like Apache listening on port 80, which would violate the principle of encryption in transit. We've got unencrypted EBS volumes attached, which would violate the principle of encryption at rest. So as you can see, as the footprint of the infrastructure changes, if somebody goes and does a manual change, for example, the next compliance scan will catch that. And we've done all the mappings from CIS to HIPAA rules, so you can actually map that back to your CFRs for your compliance reports. This also runs not just as a product, but it runs as a service. And so we're actually hosting all of the infrastructure. We're running scans on a scheduled basis. And the output of this is triggering workflow on the Cloudticity side. So depending on the severity of the violation, We'll do everything from just opening another Zendesk ticket all the way down to triggering automated workflow that starts pagers paging and gets people out of bed. So that's the service piece of that. So with that, let's take a quick switch back to the slides. And I just want to do a brief wrap up. If you're not on AWS yet and you're interested, let us know and we can help you get there. We've brought hundreds and hundreds of customers onto AWS. We've built the first health information exchange on AWS, the first patient portal on AWS, got the first MU2 attestation on AWS, and we'd like to help you. If you are on AWS and you're interested in looking at compliance as a service trial, again, reach out at compliance@cloudticity.com and we'd be happy to help. So with that, let's dive into the question and answer session.
Yes, thanks, Jerry. We do have a few questions here. First one for Joseph. Are there AWS partners that provide HIPAA-suitable non-SQL databases as a service? There's a DynamoDB, of course, but it doesn't support server-side encryption.
Yeah, so there certainly are. There's a few different routes you can go down. So I know the request is for, database as a service, but just as a reminder, if you did feel so inclined, you could always deploy, Mongo, Cassandra, Aerospike, whatever it is that you want on EC2 yourself, if, that's a route that you wanted to go down, since that would be HIPAA compliant as long as you did encrypt the database at rest. But companies like Aerospike and hold on, what was another one? I got to remember what the other name was. But they are AWS advanced tier partners that do provide encryption at rest and HIPAA compliant implementations. What is Couchbase is another one. But there's a full list of database software vendors on aws.amazon.com/partners. I have to find the link, but there are additional ones besides Aerospike and Couchbase that do provide solutions like that. They're just not listed under HIPAA directly, but they do have HIPAA offerings.
Excellent, thank you. On that note, is there an AWS roadmap for additional HIPAA-suitable services that are planned for the future?
Yes. So as I mentioned, AWS features and services are driven from customer requests. The one thing that I would say is that if there is a service that you would like to see HIPAA compliant, putting in a request does drive that on the roadmap. And there is a roadmap, but we don't make it is not publicly available. It's just one of those things that we just don't provide publicly. But, because we are very customer driven, make sure that you do put in that request if you do want to see that that service become HIPAA compliant, so that we do prioritize that. That's how we prioritize the current roadmap. And so that's where we get a lot of feedback.
Thank you. Christoph, maybe you can answer this next one. Can you share how compliance is different than InSpec, or the compliance features are different than InSpec?
Sure. Thanks, Jamie. The InSpec is essentially the core engine that is executing a test and it's running on a server. So that is only including, like, I can run it for one server. But if I talk about Chef compliance, it is a dashboard. It stores all the profiles. It makes managing those profiles pretty easy. It also is able to add nodes, to manage the nodes, so you can easily do it also via API. You can synchronize this easily with Chef server. There's a Chef server integration. So everything that is required to run it in production, I would say, is included in Chef compliance. InSpec is still a lot useful on your local development machine. So the engine is used in Test Kitchen. It's used on your local machine to run the tests. But if you want to have the convenience and also have the reporting capabilities, you need a UI to manage that. So that is what Chef Compliance and InSpec is differing. So see InSpec as a component of Chef Compliance.
That's great, thank you. Our next question, does the compliance functionality work in data centers as well as in AWS?
Yeah, this
sure.
is Jerry.
So, hey, Jerry.
Yeah, Chris, you can answer that, and then why don't you answer that in terms of the technology, and then I'll answer that in terms of the service.
All right, makes sense. So, first of all, we have to distinguish between what we want to ensure here. As Joe mentioned, we have their data center and we have the customer. So, whenever we talk about compliance, make sure we talk about compliance on the customer level. So that means your software, everything, your applications that you deploy in your infrastructure. Chef Compliance, Chef Automate, so the whole Chef ecosystem can be easily run in data centers, but it's also available in AWS. We are available in AWS Marketplace. You can easily run it. And of course, Gary is offering all the services on top. So back to you, Gary.
Yeah, so thanks. The service portion of it is really tailored specifically to AWS because there are a lot of things that we're looking at, like during the demo, the checking for encrypted EBS volumes and things like that are AWS specific. Also, we've integrated the compliance service with other AWS services like AWS config, for example, with the config rules. So a lot of the workflow that gets triggered from the service perspective is AWS specific. So the product itself will work in your data center, but our rule set that we've layered on top of the product, coupled with the workflow that's generated from those scans, is very specific to AWS.
All right. Looks like we've made it through our questions here. We're getting close to time, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Jerry, Joe, Christoph, any final words?
Yeah, this is Joe. Always reach out to any of us at AWS if you have any questions. We can help align you with a partner, such as Cloudticity, that can help you kind of embark upon the HIPAA roadmap.
Yeah, and I'll just offer again, send any email to compliance@cloudticity.com if you're looking for a free trial or if you're interested in exploring how AWS might be a good platform for your specific workload. Please reach out anytime.
All right.
Also, I encourage you to take a look on the compliance white paper that Jamie has attached to this webinar so that you get a good feeling about what Chef is offering within its platform.
All right, thank you so much, Jerry, Joe, and Christoph, for the great information and the demo. And also thank you to our audience for joining us and asking great questions. Before you leave, please take a moment to rate this presentation and leave your feedback in the Rate This tab at the top of your screen. And as Christoph mentioned, please do check out the links to additional resources in the Attachments tab. Thanks again for your time and have a wonderful day.